She was a study in deliberate motion. In a world that prized explosive speed, Elera was the slow, inevitable creep of a glacier. Her movements were never rushed, never frantic. Each step was placed with consideration, each breath drawn with a rhythm that seemed disconnected from the frantic energy of the Vanguard trials. Here, at the nation's most elite selection course, speed was currency, and Elera was destitute. They called her the Turtle, sometimes the Glacier. The names were born in the polished steel mess hall, whispered over protein paste and electrolyte water. They echoed across the unforgiving obstacle course and followed her down the perfectly aligned firing lanes. The mockery was a constant, low-grade hum, the soundtrack to her isolation. Sergeant Thorne, a man carved from granite and arrogance, was a conductor of this orchestra of scorn. He was the course favorite, a titan of muscle and velocity who moved with the predatory grace of a jungle cat. His performance was flawless, his times were legendary, and his contempt for Elera was absolute. He and his coterie, Rourke and Jennings, mostly, but the group swelled and shrank with the day's gossip, treated her existence as a personal affront. Her presence in the trials, a program designed to forge the sharpest spearheads of the military, was a joke to them, a comedy show for their amusement. "Look at her," Rourke would say, loud enough for half the barracks to hear as Elera meticulously cleaned her rifle. "She'll have that thing disassembled by the time the next war starts." Laughter would follow, sharp and cruel. Elera never responded. She simply continued her task, her hands moving with an unhurried precision that was maddening to them. Each component was wiped, oiled, and inspected with the focus of a watchmaker. Her slowness was not laziness. It was a form of profound attention. They saw weakness. They couldn't comprehend the strength beneath it. The setting itself was an altar to velocity. The training facility was a monument of brushed metal, sterile white corridors, and holographic targeting systems. The air smelled of ozone, cordite, and ambition. Everything was optimized for peak performance, for shaving milliseconds off reaction times. In this temple of the swift, Elera's steady, unchanging pace was a heresy. Her gear was worn, not like the fresh-out-of-the-box equipment of the others. The webbing on her pack was slightly frayed, the leather of her boots softened and creased from thousands of miles walked long before she ever arrived here. It was another source of ridicule. It looked impoverished next to their state-of-the-art kit. The first direct taunt had come during a simple navigation drill. They were given a map, a compass, and a set of coordinates. Thorne's team had crashed through the underbrush like a runaway train, all aggression and forward momentum. Elera moved differently. She plotted her course, checked her sight lines, and began to walk. Not run. Walk. Rourke had jogged past her, circling back with a smirk. "Lost, Glacier? Or are you just growing roots?" Elera had not looked up from her compass. She simply made a small adjustment to her bearing and continued on her path. Her silence was a fortress they could not breach. It infuriated them. She finished the course 20 minutes after everyone else, but her plotted route was a perfect, efficient line on the map. The instructors noted it with a flicker of interest, but speed was the metric that mattered. She received a middling grade. The humiliation became a daily ritual. They started a betting pool in the barracks, the Glacier Meltdown, wagering on which day she would finally quit. The pot grew with each passing week she remained. In the mess hall, if she sat at a table, Thorne and his crew would loudly get up and move, as if her slowness were contagious. "Can't sit there," Jennings would announce. "My food's getting cold just looking at her." The cruelty escalated under the approving eye of Instructor Maddox. Maddox was a man who saw the world in terms of predators and prey. He believed in breaking candidates down to build them up, but his methods were colored by his personal biases. He favored Thorne, seeing a younger version of himself in the man's swaggering confidence. He saw Elera as a clerical error, a waste of a valuable training slot. During a session on the obstacle course, a notoriously brutal structure of ropes, walls, and mud pits known as the Weaver, Elera moved with her usual, maddening calm. She tested each handhold. She ensured her footing was perfect before shifting her weight. She was methodical, safe, and slow. Thorn, having already completed the course in record time, stood beside Maddox, watching her. "She's not a soldier. She's a metronome," Thorn scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "And a slow one at that." Maddox had chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Don't worry, Thorn. The crucible will sort the wheat from the chaff." The crucible was the final test. A 3-day, 70-mile forced march through the jagged, unforgiving terrain of the Dragon's Teeth Mountains. It was designed to shatter the strongest candidates, a brutal culmination of every skill they had learned. It was here that Maddox decided to make his move. The night before the exercise, he held a final gear inspection. He moved down the line of anxious candidates, his eyes scanning every strap and buckle. When he reached Elera, he paused. He yanked on the shoulder strap of her pack, the one with the worn webbing. He pulled at it, hard, twisting it in a way it was not meant to bend. A faint tearing sound, audible only to Elera, signaled a thread giving way. Maddox threw the pack to the ground. "This equipment is a hazard, candidate," he declared, his voice booming across the silent formation. "The stitching is compromised. You could have a gear failure at a critical moment." Elera stared at the pack. She had checked that stitching herself not 3 hours earlier. It had been worn, but solid. "As a remedial measure for your lack of attention to detail," Maddox continued, a cruel glint in his eye, "you will carry a weighted penalty pack. 40 extra pounds. Maybe that will teach you to take this seriously." A wave of snickers rippled through the ranks. Thorn shot Rourke a triumphant smirk. This was it. This would be the thing that finally broke her. There was no way the slowest candidate could survive the crucible carrying nearly double the standard weight. Elera said nothing. She looked at Maddox, her expression unreadable. Then she bent down, retrieved her discarded pack, and walked to the penalty station to draw the weighted one. Her movements were just as deliberate, just as calm as they had always been. "They think they can break me. They'll learn." The first day of the crucible was a special kind of hell. The sun beat down on the rocky terrain, and the penalty pack dug into Elera's shoulders with vicious teeth. The extra 40 pounds was a monstrous burden. It wasn't just the weight. It was the imbalance, the way it shifted her center of gravity, forcing every muscle to work harder just to stay upright. Thorn's team set a blistering pace from the start, disappearing over the first ridge within an hour. The other teams followed, a scattered collection of struggling figures. Elera was, as always, dead last. Her pace was even slower now, a steady, rhythmic plod. Step breathe, step breathe. The world narrowed to the few feet of treacherous ground in front of her. The mockery was gone, replaced by a kind of pitying certainty. They didn't need to taunt her anymore. The pack and the mountain would do the work for them. They'd find her at a checkpoint, defeated, or she'd simply radio in her failure. But she didn't fail. She arrived at the day one checkpoint long after the sun had set, hours behind the last team. The supervising instructor, a weary sergeant named Diaz, looked at her with a mix of surprise and grudging respect. He scanned her ID tag and noted her time. "You've got a mandatory 6-hour rest period, candidate," he said, his voice softer than she was used to. "Get some food, some water. You're falling too far behind." Elera just nodded, refilled her canteens, and methodically broke down her gear. She didn't sleep for 6 hours. She slept for 4, using the other 2 to meticulously check her equipment, tend to the hot spots on her feet, and study the map for the next day's route. She moved with the same unhurried purpose she always had. The second day was worse. The route led them into the heart of the Dragon's Teeth, a series of steep ascents and treacherous descents. A sudden, cold rain began to fall, turning the rocky paths into slick, muddy traps. It was on a narrow, exposed ridge known as the Widow's Perch that the world fell apart. The exercise included simulated combat scenarios. As the teams navigated the ridge, automated training charges were meant to detonate nearby, simulating artillery fire and forcing them to find cover. It was a test of reaction time and situational awareness. Thorne's team was moving across the most exposed section of the ridge when a charge detonated. It was supposed to be a concussive blast with a bright flash, nothing more. But this one was different. It went off with a sharp, cracking sound, and it was too close to the cliff face. It must have hit a weak point in the rock, a fissure no one had seen. A deep groan echoed through the mountains, a sound of ancient stone giving way. Rocks, from pebbles to boulders the size of a man's chest, began to cascade down the slope. "Rock slide," someone screamed over the comms. The other candidates scrambled for cover. Thorne, always at the front, was caught in the worst of it. A slab of granite slammed into the path just ahead of him. He tried to leap back, but his foot slipped on the wet stone. He went down hard, his leg twisting beneath him at an unnatural angle. A sickening snap echoed faintly over the roar of the falling rock. Another boulder crashed down, striking his side and sending his rifle skittering over the edge into the abyss. The slide lasted less than a minute. When the dust settled, the ridge was a chaos of fresh, sharp rock. Rourke and Jennings, who had managed to shelter behind an outcropping, were pale and shaken but unharmed. Thorne was not moving. Elera was nearly a mile back when she heard the explosion and the frantic calls over the radio. She saw the dust cloud rising from the widow's perch. Her pace did not change. It remained steady, constant, inexorable. Step, breathe. Step, breathe. She was not panicking. She was simply moving toward the problem. By the time she reached the site, a tense, helpless scene had unfolded. Rourke and Jennings were with Thorne, trying to offer what little aid they could. The team's medic was trying to stabilize the leg, but the break was severe, a compound fracture with bone piercing the skin. Thorne was conscious, his face a mask of white-hot agony and disbelief. His invincibility had been shattered. Maddox's voice crackled over the radio, broadcasting to all teams. "Thorne is down. I repeat, Sergeant Thorne is combat ineffective. His team is to stabilize him and await medevac. The exercise is suspended. All teams, hold your positions." Another voice cut in, the pilot of the medevac helicopter. "Command, this is Nightingale. I can't get to that ridge. The winds are too high, and the updrafts are unpredictable. I can't risk it. The closest safe LZ is Checkpoint Charlie. That's at least 5 miles east on the other side of the pass." A heavy silence fell over the radio. 5 miles, through the most difficult terrain of the entire course, carrying a wounded man who weighed over 200 pounds, plus his gear. It was impossible. It would take a full team of fresh soldiers hours, and Thorne was going into shock. He didn't have hours. Elera arrived, the heavy pack on her shoulders. She surveyed the scene with calm eyes. Rourke looked up, his face smudged with dirt and fear. "It's bad," he stammered. "His leg, we can't move him." Thorne, delirious with pain, focused his gaze on Elera. Even now, his arrogance was a reflex. "Go get help, slow poke," he gritted out through clenched teeth. Don't try to be a hero. You're not cut out for it." It was the final provocation. An insult born of desperation, but an insult nonetheless. It was aimed at her core, at the very quality they had all mocked for months. Her slowness. Her weakness. Elera did not respond to his words. She simply shrugged off the 40-pound penalty pack, letting it fall to the ground with a heavy thud. The relief to her shoulders was immense, a feeling of sudden weightlessness. Then she knelt beside Thorne. Her hands, so often ridiculed for their lack of speed, moved with an incredible, practiced efficiency. She checked the medic's work on the makeshift splint, tightening a strap here, adjusting a pad there. She took her own canteen and poured a little water onto a cloth, wiping the sweat and grime from Thorne's forehead. Rourke watched, bewildered. "What are you doing? We have to wait for help." Elera looked at him. Her voice, when it came, was flat and factual, devoid of emotion. "Help is not coming here. The LZ is 5 miles away. He will die here." She turned her attention back to Thorne. She expertly strapped his arms across his chest. Then, in a single, fluid motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics and biology, she positioned herself, bent her knees, and hoisted him onto her back. 200 pounds of dead weight, plus his own gear. The entire group stared, jaws slack. Rourke and Jennings were speechless. Maddox, watching through a drone feed in the command center, shot to his feet. "What the hell does she think she's doing?" he roared. Elera adjusted Thorne's weight, her legs solid as oak roots beneath her. She took a breath, then another. She found her rhythm, and she began to walk. One step, then another. "He is cargo. The cargo must arrive." Her pace was slow. It was the same deliberate, measured pace they had all mocked for months. But now it looked different. It was no longer the movement of weakness, but of impossible strength. It was the pace of a woman who knew exactly how much energy she had and how to expend it over an impossible distance without fail. She walked past Rourke and Jennings, who stumbled back as if she were some mythical creature. She did not look at them. Her eyes were fixed on the path ahead. The journey was a descent into a private world of pain. Each step sent a shockwave through her legs and spine. The weight of Thorne was a crushing, suffocating force. His groans of pain were a constant, grim rhythm against her ear. The wind howled through the pass, trying to tear them from the mountain. But her pace never broke. Step, breathe, shift the weight. Step, breathe. In the command center, the mood had shifted from disbelief to a kind of horrified awe. All drone cameras were now fixed on the lone, slow-moving figure. Specialist Chun, a senior medic and physiology expert, leaned close to a monitor displaying Elera's vitals from her biometric sensor. "Look at that," Chun murmured, pointing to the screen. "Her heart rate is elevated, but it's stable. 140 beats per minute. It's not spiking. Her respiration is perfectly even. How is that possible?" Maddox was pacing, his face pale. "She's going to collapse. She'll kill them both." "I don't think she is," Chin said softly. "That gait. I've seen it before. In documentaries about Sherpas. High-altitude mountaineers. They call it the mule's gait. It's a technique for carrying heavy loads over extreme distances. It maximizes oxygen efficiency. It's not about speed. It's about not stopping. Ever." The whisper spread through the room. The glacier. The turtle. They had been mocking the very source of her power. On the mountain, Elera moved through a landscape of agony. Her thighs burned with lactic acid. Her shoulders screamed where the straps of Thorne's vest cut into her flesh. Thorne had passed out, his weighted dead, unhelpful burden. She reached a steep, scree-covered slope. Going down was more dangerous than going up. A single misstep would send them both tumbling. She shortened her stride, planting each foot with absolute certainty before shifting her weight. It was excruciatingly slow. "Laugh now. You won't soon." An hour passed. Then two. She was a machine. A human metronome ticking off the miles one agonizing step at a time. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the cruel peaks in hues of orange and purple. Back in the command center, the base commander, General Madsen, had arrived. He was a quiet, authoritative man who had seen more than a share of war and training exercises. He watched the main screen in silence, his expression unreadable. "Who is this candidate?" he asked, his voice low. Maddox, sweating now, stepped forward. "Cadet Elera. Sir, from Logistics Division. She's been a marginal performer." Madsen's eyes never left the screen. "Pull up her file." A technician tapped at a keyboard. Elera's profile appeared on a secondary monitor. It was sparse. Modest test scores, no commendations, a single, faded photograph. But Madsen's eyes fixed on one line. "Next of kin." "Her father," Madsen said, his voice barely a whisper. "Her father was Tenzin." Chun looked up from his monitor. "Tenzin? As in, the Tenzin from the Annapurna rescue? The Gurkha legend?" "The same," Madsen confirmed, a new light of understanding in his eyes. "He carried 2 injured climbers off that mountain in a blizzard. They said he walked for 30 hours straight. He was a consultant for our Special Forces Mountain Warfare program for a decade." The room fell silent. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift. "She wasn't raised in the city," Madsen continued, speaking to the entire room now. She was raised at 10,000 feet. She wasn't trained to be fast. She was trained to endure. She was trained to never, ever stop. He turned his gaze to Maddox, and for the first time, Maddox saw a flash of cold fury in the general's eyes. She's not a marginal performer, instructor. You just weren't qualified to evaluate her. The final mile was the worst. Elera's vision was starting to tunnel. The world was a gray, blurry smear. But the LZ was visible now, a small, flat clearing where the Nightingale helicopter was waiting, its rotors spinning slowly. She could hear the thwomp, thwomp, thwomp of the blades. It was a finish line. She summoned her last reserves of strength. Her legs were numb, moving on memory alone. She walked out of the pass and onto the clearing. The flight medics rushed forward with a gurney. She did not collapse. She walked all the way to them, and only then did she carefully, gently, lower Thorne onto the gurney. He was alive. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. As the medics swarmed him, Elera stood there for a moment, swaying on her feet. The world rushed back in. The noise of the helicopter, the shouts of the medics, the cold wind on her face. She had done it. She took a step back, then another, her job complete. And then her legs finally gave out, and she crumpled to the ground. When she awoke, she was in the infirmary. The first thing she saw was Specialist Chun, checking her for drip. "Welcome back," he said with a small, respectful smile. "You were severely dehydrated and suffering from extreme muscle exhaustion. But you'll be fine." She tried to sit up. "Easy," he said, gently pushing her back down. "You carried over 250 pounds for 5 miles through the dragon's teeth. You're allowed to rest." He paused. "Thorne is stable. He's being transferred to the main hospital. He's going to lose the leg, but you save his life. Everyone knows it." Later that day, General Madsen came to see her. He stood by her bed, his hat in his hands. "I knew your father," he said simply. "He was the toughest man I ever met. He would be proud of you, cadet." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. He placed a small object on her bedside table. It was the Vanguard Trial Completion Coin, given only to those who passed the crucible. Then he gave her a crisp, perfect salute, turned, and left. The fallout in the aftermath was swift and total. The story of what she had done spread through the base like wildfire. The glacier, the turtle, the names were now spoken with reverence. The legend of the slow girl who carried the strongest man off a mountain became an academy fable overnight. Thorne's career was over. He was medically discharged, but his pride was a far more grievous wound. In his hospital bed, he saw the endless replays of the drone footage on the news. He saw her, this quiet, unassuming girl, carrying him like a child. He saw her unwavering pace, her impossible endurance. The arrogance that had defined his entire life crumbled into a fine, bitter dust. He refused all visitors. Instructor Maddox was subjected to a formal inquiry. The sabotage of Elera's pack, coupled with his blatant favoritism and poor judgment during the crisis, led to his immediate removal from the training cadre. He was reassigned to a supply depot in the middle of a frozen wasteland, a desk job where his only responsibility was counting inventory. His career, for all intents and purposes, was over. Rourke and Jennings, along with the rest of Thorne's coterie, were shattered. They walked the halls with their heads down. The certainty and cruelty had been replaced by a deep, humbling shame. They had mocked a legend. They had tried to break something unbreakable. Some tried to approach Elera to apologize, but they could never find the words. Her quiet dignity was a more profound rebuke than any shouting match could ever be. Elera, for her part, did not seek the spotlight. When she was released from the infirmary, she went back to her routine. She cleaned her rifle. She maintained her gear. She moved at her own pace. But now no one laughed. They watched. They learned. She finished the Vanguard trials. Not at the top of the class for speed, but her resilience and peer evaluation scores, filled with awestruck, handwritten apologies from her former tormentors, were the highest in the Academy's history. She was offered a prestigious post in the capital, a fast track to officer candidacy. She respectfully declined. Instead, she put in a request for a transfer. Her new post was at the Mountain Warfare Training Center in the highest, most remote mountain range in the country. She wasn't a commander. She was an instructor. Her story endured. New recruits of the Vanguard trials were told the legend of the glacier's pace, a reminder that strength came in many forms, and that the true measure of a soldier was not how fast they started the race, but their will to carry the fallen to the finish line, no matter the cost. Years later, a young, nervous recruit was struggling on a high-altitude endurance march. He was falling behind, his lungs burning, ready to quit. A quiet, unassuming instructor fell in a step beside him. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't pushing him. "Breathe with me," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Match my steps. Slower is smoother. Smoother is further." The recruit looked at her, at the woman who was a living legend on the base. He synchronized his breathing to hers, his steps to her steady, rhythmic gait. The pain in his lungs subsided. His panic faded. He found a new rhythm. He found the glacier's pace. And he did not stop.